All right, hello everyone, and thanks for joining What's Next for the CMIO webinar. My name is Jordan Leibnitz, and I'm part of the marketing team here at IMO. Before we get started, I want to take care of a few items for those attending. First off, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to you for future viewing after the webinar. Throughout the session, all attendees will be in listen-only mode, but if you have any questions while our speakers are speaking, type them into the questions section. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session and we'll get to as many questions as we can. But if for any reason yours is not addressed, we will follow up with you after the presentation. So today we have two presenters speaking, Dr. Beckett Mankey, the CMIO and pediatric cardiologist at Confluence Health, and our very own IMO Chief Strategy Officer, Dale Sanders. So as mentioned before, if you have any comments while our presenters are speaking, just type them into the question box. And with all of this being said, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Mankey.
Thanks, Jordan. Great to be here with both of you guys. I'm not going to read through these objectives. These were on the invite, and then I would summarize those as what does Beckett do all day. We're going to start off with my senior colleague here and friend Dale Sanders talking about CMIO 0.5, the early days.
Yeah, the early days. This is what I get for being older than Beckett. I had this very unusual opportunity when I was at Intermountain Healthcare to be the Chief Medical Informatics Officer at LDS Hospital and Intermountain's largest region, which was very unusual. I was the only non-PhD, non-MD to ever hold that position. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to get at the front lines of clinical decision support and medical informatics at that time. And it was that in that era, which was in the early 2000s, 2001, places like Intermountain had their own homegrown EHR, which was pretty amazing. It was the HELP system. Mass General had one, Vanderbilt had one, I think Columbia might have had one too. And so medical informaticists at that time were, they were really it was kind of a cool place to be because it was showing what you could do with computer-aided decision support, following in the footsteps of people like Homer Warner and Al Pryor and Reed Gardner, those early pioneers of the use of computers to improve decision making. But what we found, and what everybody ended up finding, at Intermountain and the other homegrown EHRs, is that those custom systems couldn't be supported and maintained, right? Our system ran on Tandem computers, Tackle programming language, and you just couldn't you couldn't build enough skill set to keep that maintained for much longer. So the informatics role started to change from maintaining these homegrown EHR systems to, okay, well, now we're probably going to have to transition to something that's commercially supportable. And so Intermountain eventually landed on Cerner, many years later, converting off of HELP. So yeah, it was also kind of perceived as scholarly and academic, but actually in a positive way. And somewhere along the lines, the CMIO role became affiliated with scholarly and not pragmatic. And I think to some degree, we can talk about it, Becca, but I think to some degree we're still shaking that off. And the other thing that happened, the implementation of EHRs kind of fell to CIOs and CMOs. So when FX, Cerner, Allscripts, these commercial products came out, it became the primary responsibility of the CIO and the CMO to implement those. And the CMIO got kind of pushed aside. And I think that was unfortunate. But the good news is, as Beckett's going to talk about, I think the future of the CMIO role is now back up on the rise again. Okay, back to you, friend.
Great, thanks, Dale.
And we walked to school, in blizzards and bare feet during the old days.
So clearly, you guys set us off on a path that was going to continue, but 2009, nothing like injecting $30 billion of government funding into the system to really kickstart and perhaps overgrow the system or grow too fast. But I'm going to really start around 2009 forward. And the way I want to organize our talk today is really kind of three eras of the CMIO role. CMIO 1.0 is largely involved with implementation. CMIO 2.0, okay, we've got our systems in place. Let's start talking about quality and efficiency. And then hopefully as we move into value-based care more, CMIO 3.0 roles. So we'll use this as a roadmap, and I'm going to start filling up this roadmap throughout the talk. I want to start on kind of a personal level on what my skill set has had to evolve to. One, I don't know how to be a good a CMIO if I don't have some medical practice. So although it does decrease, I think it's a mistake for folks to completely give up clinical practice. On the technical side, I think many of us get into the role because of a desire, interest, or even some capability on a technical side. But that also, I think, has begun to transition and needs to transition, because I'm less involved now in building things. I'm much more involved in ensuring that we have scalable and sustainable solutions and that we're following standards. So those are two aspects. Obviously, I've had to Google things under the desk in meetings to learn about business operational issues and various leadership development strategies. But I will call out one of the roles of the CMIO, which I think actually has value. We've been in meetings where people often complain about the current state of health IT. That is not a pure waste of time. As long as it's limited, there is some very therapeutic value in that role. So moving on, obviously we can't talk about the CMIO without talking about the EHR implementation. And this was, I'm focusing on the initial role from the paper chart to a computer-based EHR. And although far from perfect, we have had some success. Even the curmudgeons will often agree that we don't want to go back to a paper chart, but we've made it readable and available. Unfortunately, the analyzable part is still often beyond our grasp. And we've integrated some things and got some computerization. Debatable if we've made significant improvements in quality and safety or cost reduction, which was one of the initial reasons to fund that massive high-tech act. And again, we've made the transition from paper to computer. I would argue that most of the time, or in most instances, we really haven't gone from an analog healthcare delivery process to a digital process that focuses on the patient and not just simply the encounter. So some success. I think we also realized as we implemented these things, wow, we need some specialists to help meet the needs for these to continue to be successful or to continue to grow. And the way I show this is our operational colleagues live in the hospital or in the clinics. They're taking care of patients. They have needs to improve their processes. Often in another building, you've got some very smart IT folks, but unfortunately, getting efficient and accurate communication between the two is often a rarity in my experience. And that's really the role of the clinical informaticist. I've got a little bit of skill in both of these worlds. And you can see the stuff that a clinical informaticist and CMIO does is in that box there in the middle. You'll notice there's not a whole lot of IT skills, right? These are all the other people and process skills that are necessary to make whatever IT tools are created actually improve the healthcare. So I've led a couple of informatics departments now. It's unfortunately still happens. It's like, oh, you're one of the doctors that likes computers. Hopefully that is a declining sentiment, because that's far from the role that clinical informaticists play. And again, I've mentioned focus on transitioning from being builders to clinical informaticists. And it's pretty exciting. We have almost a decade now of board certification at the provider level for clinical informatics. And we're now getting this kind of nice mix of folks that tend to be younger, that have had formal fellowship training in clinical informatics for 2 years, and what they bring to the table compared to the old folks like myself who got constructive credit for that 2 years of fellowship and simply had to pass our board certification. I do tell people that CMIO is actually the wrong title. That's the title I have, and I'm quite happy with that. But it implies to a lot of folks that since I'm a physician and it's chief medical, that I represent the physicians in clinical informatics. And realistically, my role, or the CMIO role, should encompass all clinical users of the health IT products. So you see some organizations have officially changed their title to CHIO. It's a minority, but it's very important to know because we don't want to play this EHR hot potato game where you're just shifting workload from one profession to another when really it's got to be the team-based care for success. Of course, if I'm working in a nursing area or working in a pharmacy area or respiratory therapy, some questions do come up, which is, who do you report to? So that brings us to our first poll question, which if you are at an organization that has a CMIO, who does that CMIO currently report to? And I think, Jordan, you're going to pull up the question.
While we're polling on that, when I was in that role at Intermountain, I reported to what amounted to the deputy CEO for the region.
Interesting.
So it was fairly elevated, right? And it was, again, it was Intermountain's largest region at the time, about almost $2 billion per year in revenue. And that was also, I think, indicative of the respect that those early informaticists had in their thinking about computerization.
No, that's very interesting.
It looks about 30% report to the CIO and about 23% say, I don't know.
How many report to the chief medical officer? Jordan, I can't see the results.
17%.
Okay, so I report to the chief medical officer. I have a bias. I think that's the right answer, but we'll talk more about it as we go through the talk.
There's 20% here that are dual. They have a dotted line to both CIO and CMO.
Yep, and that's pretty common as well.
Yeah, that could work. Although, yeah, never mind. I won't say. Maybe, there could be a time. Yeah, I'm not so sure that reporting to the CIO is a good model anymore. And I was a CIO, and I did have a CMIO reporting to me, but I'm not so sure that's a great model anymore.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it's as we walk through this, you'll see the role is really transitioned.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about EHR conversions. So I think many organizations find that their first EHR, that's just not a great match for a variety of reasons, even if it was a homegrown EHR. And I've been a part of several conversions. Sometimes those conversions happen because of an acquisition. So let's talk a little bit about those. One of the challenges I've seen over the years is that my senior leaders say, oh, this is going to be easy. This isn't like our initial go live paper to computer. And it's been my experience, and I've tried to educate my colleagues that a computer to computer conversion is just as much work as the initial paper to computer. The problems may be slightly different. And the assumption is, well, it's already digital data, so just move it over. The challenge that we obviously are seeing is their quality data. Is that data in discrete form? And even if it is in discrete form, unfortunately, the vendors have not made it terribly easy to move it from one to the next without a whole lot of cost and mapping. So unfortunately, a lot of times these conversions are, I will dump a whole bunch of PDFs into your new system. What I do focus on, I recommend this for EHR go lives or conversions and almost any project nowadays, is what are the goals of this? What's the highest level goal of the project? And I talk about the 3 R's that we'll talk about here. Number one is just to simply replicate what you're doing in a new system. And most people don't want to do that, right? Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be changing systems. On the other extreme is you can go into these planning and design sessions at the beginning of the project. And a lot of people think they're coming in with a blank sheet of paper and they're going to reinvent medicine. I find that's incredibly difficult. We all know what a wicked problem medicine is in our country. And it results in a lot of wasted effort. So I'm trying to direct my leaders and my colleagues in any project let's replace what we have with best practice. Okay, this isn't 20 years ago, and we're making up stuff in a health IT world for the first time. There's a lot of good experience and knowledge out there, and in some case, clinical informatics best practice that's published that we want to simply copy. And I have been accused of being called the chief medical imitation officer, and I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about clinical decision support, because you mentioned it earlier, Dale, and that was the big promise even in the 90s, right? If we digitize these things, we can offer computerized clinical decision support to improve quality and safety. I think you and I would agree we haven't gotten there yet. Is that a fair assumption?
It is. I'll comment on that really quickly, Brent. One of the reasons we managed to pull off real clinical decision support at Intermountain is because we own understanding of the patient, understanding of their treatment, and understanding of their outcomes.
Yep.
And when you have those three, patient profiling and demographics, patient therapeutics and treatment, and outcomes, like we knew outcomes, we're tracking real outcomes, then you bend that all back to the point of care with clinical decision support. And we could do that because we owned all the data, we owned the EHR, all the programming language, we could pull that off. But we haven't figured out how to replicate that with these commercial EHRs yet.
Well, and knowing you so well, I would add a fourth item there is you likely had the discipline to not overuse it or use it in a way that was, oh, one bad thing happened, so we're going to put an alert in for everybody going forward.
That's a good point. We were careful about prioritizing where we used it.
Right. And, the airlines use it. There's a great story from the book, The Digital Doctor, where he talks about, all these engineers come in and talk to the pilots and, hey, I'm going to alert about this part of the airplane. And the pilots get final decision whether or not that alert actually shows up in the cockpit. Right. And most of those are no, and that's not necessarily how we've done things. What I want to talk about is actually, fast forward 10 years, you've been live for 10 years on your system. You probably built a lot of decision support at the very beginning. And my experience is you build it and you never look at it again, right? And often when my experience reviewing order sets with specialists, usually they don't want to do it because it's extra work. But when they do, they look at it and they say, oh my gosh, this is 10-year-old medicine. Why are we doing this here? So the maintenance of that is super boring, but also super important. The other thing that we're doing, that I've been doing for the last several years, is how is this decision support actually performing? And what you see here is just a screenshot from Praise Health, who I'm working with now at Confluence, and to give us ideas of how people are responding to alerts. Are they overriding them 99.9% of the time, which is probably not an effective alert? How do those compare to other alerts at a global level in the system? Because I've been guilty of closing out alerts even without reading them, I'm embarrassed to say, but because there was so much noise in the system. So maintenance of them, monitoring performance, and does the performance actually drive an outcome, right? If you use the order set, does that improve outcomes? Does it decrease length of stay? So that's where I think the CMIO 2.0 role is starting to look at.
One of the things that we had at Intermountain 2, friend, was a formal committee that evaluated decision support effectiveness, the algorithms. So we took that very seriously. And again, I wrote on the coattails of people that have been doing this. If I did anything, I just made it a little better. I didn't originate it. But I thought the ownership of that clinical decision support and the governance at Intermountain was a great role model.
And I've made a rule that one profession can't give alerts for another profession, i.e. doctors can't say, I want an alert for the nurses, unless they go and talk to the nurses and the nurses agree to that. Mm-hmm. We've all heard about alert fatigue. This is a very dramatic case, but I put it here because it's a recent one that many of us are aware of. But part of this horrible thing that happened to the 75-year-old patient was several alerts were overridden, and interviews with other folks in this particular situation were like, oh yeah, we override the alerts all the time because there's so much garbage there. So I see my role as CMIO as making sure that we're protecting not only the organization, but protecting our frontline caregivers and not drowning them with noise that may then be held against them. On a positive note, though, many of us probably are aware that CMS is now requiring attestation to completing the SAFER guides, which is really a way of evaluating the safety of your EHR system that has likely been in place for a while. And again, boring work, but critically important. You know this from monitoring systems in the Air Force, Dale, to ensure appropriate safety things are happening.
Yeah, I love this. Dean Sittig and others have been working on this for a long time. I think it's super important.
So CDS, obviously the EHR in general, I don't suffer from getting a lot of high fives and hugs when I walk around the hospital. And that's because you don't have to look very far for a headline that says the EHR is to blame for all burnout and ruining the doctor-patient relationship. So these are far from perfect. And that's where CMIO 2.0, let's say, has been heavily involved, myself included, in wellness initiatives, burnout reduction types of things. And it's a little bit easier nowadays because the vendors have provided us some nice analytics. And what you see here, the graph on the bottom, this is one provider. The x-axis is midnight to midnight, and the y-axis is time spent, active time spent in the EHR per day. And this provider has patients scheduled between those two black dotted lines. Obviously, there's a lot of time spent outside of those areas. The person is getting up, it looks like at 4 a.m. to finish up charting. And when I see this, this is somebody who I expect is either going to leave my organization or ask for a reduction in hours. So clearly makes me sad.
Is this a utility that Epic embeds now as a natural part of the deployment?
Yes. And we have, what I love is I can tell you how many times people at my organization have accessed this indexed to 100 providers. So I can get an idea of, are we using the tool? On the top there, what you see is kind of cool, because in the old days, my boss, the CMO, would call and say, so-and-so struggling, deploy a trainer. And the trainer would show up super enthusiastic and say, hi, I'm here to help. Now the trainer shows up and says, looking at your profile, in this case, you struggle with the in-basket and time and notes compared to your peers nationally. So we're going to focus on how we can help you in that area.
That's so cool. That's
so
so
it's
cool.
I mean, I'm a doc. This is a diagnostic tool for the user.
Absolutely.
For me to diagnose, and then I can apply appropriate treatment. And that
Sarah,
treatment.
You got to give a plug of Sarah Miller. I don't know if she's here today, but Sarah Miller, who you've worked with.
Yep.
Beck, she led clinical applications for me at Northwestern. We built what amounts to the first version of this back in 2007. And it was rudimentary, but we had graphs that were showing, where you're using the EHR, where you're not. And I like to think that we were some of the early thinkers on how to portray this back to clinicians.
The challenge I have is ongoing education. And when I ask somebody, well, this person needs some time for ongoing education, what I typically get is the hand put up and it says, nope, sorry, I had my training 10 years ago, right? I don't need any more. And I recall my former chief nurse officer, who's just a brilliant, brilliant person. I looked at her and I said, tell me one other part of medical care that we don't have ongoing education. And she slapped her forehead and I said, aha, I got you. So we started to bring some ongoing education.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about this lately, though. On the left-hand side, this just happens to be our Epic update schedule for the year. So fortunately, it's only 4 times a year. A lot of places it's every month or every 2 weeks in some cases. But health IT is an iterative process, right? And we're still learning in this space, even 20, 30 years on. Unfortunately, I think that clashes with some of healthcare, and I don't mean this in an insulting way to any of my clinical colleagues, but especially when it comes to health IT and arguably in other parts of medicine, we don't change very quickly, right? So you've got iterative on one side changing quarterly versus another, a user that changes on a 5 to 10 year cycle. So I guess it shouldn't be surprising then when we looked at this. So what you see here is progress note length over time for family medicine. And this could be the same for any specialty. I'm not picking on my family medicine colleagues. But Dale, we were all excited back in 2020 when we heard, hey, there's new coding guidelines that you don't need to run nearly as much.
I was so excited. I should go back and pull up my social media posts about it.
Right? We all thought, wow, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, right. Finally. No.
Not a bug.
Didn't do anything. So
now
sad.
maybe we can blame COVID a little bit. But people don't change their habits. I was fortunate enough that I started here at Confluence right after these guidelines changed, and I was able to create a brand new template upon arrival, and therefore my notes actually are a quarter of the length that they used to be.
Really?
It feels naughty, I'll be honest, but it's working.
Oh, we should have another conversation or webinar on clinical notes. Like what constitutes a good clinical note that also doesn't burden the physician? Where's that balance, right? Between, yeah.
All right, for the sake of time, let's keep driving forward. So let's talk about awards. And you've been a CIO, Dale. I'm assuming that you've pursued these awards. And again, I don't mean anything negative about these two organizations, because these awards, the HIMSS and CHIME and others, ensure adequate infrastructure and security, downtime, those sorts of things. I have yet to meet a clinician, though, that gives any credence or cares about these at all. So.
No, and I think it's actually a bit of an opiate, really. I think it's actually a bit of an opiate. These awards make you feel like you're doing a lot better than reality. So I've never actually pursued one of these. I've received one a couple of times, but I've never pursued one because I just don't, nothing against everybody, but I just don't think they're great.
Well, and I've gone through those lists, and yes, I want everything on those lists of requirements, but they don't improve the clinician experience, right? No. So the quadruple aim, the Arch Collaborative started, I think, about 4 years ago now, with the target of, let's look at the clinician experience with the EHR, just like we do for a variety of IT related products. Mm-hmm. So they have been a tremendous asset. What I'm showing here, so they do surveys. They've surveyed over 300 organizations to date, a couple 100,000 clinicians in a standardized way, asking them about their EHR experience. And at the end of the day, the organization gets a net EHR experience score from -100 to +100, just like a net promoter score. And what you see here, each one of those colored horizontal bars is a different organization. There is a wide variation in EHR experience, right? You can see the physician average is barely above neutral. But now this allows us to say, wait a minute, where is this variation coming from, right? What are those organizations, those blue bars at the top doing? And this could be all Epic or all Cerner customers, right? So it's clearly not the software that you paid for. So what are they doing at the top that, let's say, organizations farther down are not doing? And if those ones farther down copy, can they move the needle going forward? And it actually now arms me as an informatician. For years, this is embarrassing to say, but we'd all sit around and say, wow, people are unhappy. And we'd all pull ideas out of our backside saying, I know it's going to solve it, right? If you give everybody a scribe, this will make it all better. Well, now I have data to show that actually that doesn't tend to move the needle. Mm-hmm. And that's an awfully expensive therapy at $35,000 a year.
Yeah.
If we're not going to actually move the needle in the end user experience.
Yeah. We're just adding more layers on top of just, inefficiency. Like the old saying, stop optimizing something that shouldn't exist in the first place. And
yep.
I'm glad if you're a physician and you want to scribe and you feel like it helps, that's great. But it just seems like just another added expense. that we should be addressing more fundamentally.
And I want to bring data to the table when we're making these decisions. What I find fascinating is, they have sliced and diced this data so many different ways, but there's three big players in the room, right? It's the EHR vendor, the IT shop at an organization, and the end user. And you see most of the variation in experience comes at the user level characteristics, right? And I'll tell you, it all comes down to education and training for the most part, also a little bit of governance. But it helps me focus our resources in the right area. And then finally, people snicker when I show this image on the left, the science of improving the EHR, but that's where we're starting to get. We can actually bring data and say, listen, we know certain therapies are better than others, so let's pursue that based on others. So it's super exciting work. I love the stuff that the Arch Collaborative's doing.
It was good.
All right, moving on to governance. Clearly, we needed governance at the time of implementation. At the time, there were rare out-of-the-box standards, so we were making stuff up as we go. That's okay. Sometimes you need to do that. We all know that there was governance by attendance, which meant if you didn't attend, you might have been on the short end of the stick, and the EHR hot potato game kind of got you. But moving forward, I'm actually starting to do less governance, which some of my old colleagues are probably shocked at. But what I saw was, a group has only so much time and energy to devote to any project, improvement project. And what we were doing, in my experience, was spending 95% of that energy building a tool or debating on how it should be designed. And by the time it went live, everybody was tired and there wasn't much adoption, and we didn't move the needle. So I'm actually starting to pivot our governance to improvement governance. And now we've got established best practices. So we start with our out-of-the-box defaults, which, by the way, in the Epic world, they're determined not by Epic, by clinical user panels. But we only deviate from that if there is a darn good reason at Confluence Health. And guess what? There usually isn't. We copy best practices. We're not in the invention game anymore. We have a style guide. So, there's 20 different ways to do a single item or a single process in Epic. We don't allow each specialty to pick one of those 20 because it's way too expensive to maintain and the end user experience gets wildly complicated. I've also got a rule where we talk about the 3 A's. So when something goes live, you don't get to make changes on it for 6 to 12 months because you're in that adoption phase, right? And I've been guilty of this. As soon as something goes live, I want to start jiggering with it. But you can't. That's not how good change management works. You know this, Dale. So you don't get to adapt or abandon for 6 months. And then a lot of my benefit now comes from outside of my control, and that's our CEO, our chief medical officer, our chief operating officer, the culture of trust in the organization that says, you know what, we know your guiding principles in the informatics space. We're going to delegate these decisions to you because otherwise we can just debate all day and not get anywhere.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump a little bit into CMIO 3.0, value-based care. Clearly, stewardship is a piece of that. And I want to talk about stewardship in 3 different areas. One is partnering with my CIO. We show this slide, which is our pie slide, all the time. And the stuff that everybody wants to do are those 2 darker purple quadrants on the right-hand side, the enterprise projects and operational projects. But we use our guiding principles to make sure those other pieces of the pie don't keep growing and gobbling up those fun projects, right? So we don't bring in another vendor if one of our existing vendors can do the job just fine, right? Because that adds to complexity and starts eating into operational projects and enterprise projects. Because I guarantee you, my CFO ain't letting me grow that pie. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. So we work on stewardship of IT resources because, as you know from being a CIO, demand exceeds supply by orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Let's talk about healthcare resources, right? I get to be involved in ensuring that we do the right testing and we don't do wasteful things. I know you're passionate about this, Dale. So choosing wisely has been far from perfect, but it's set us on I think, a useful course. And now the advanced decision support that you need before ordering advanced imaging like CAT scans and MRIs has been helpful, because no doubt you know the old joke, Dale, is what's the most expensive piece of equipment in your healthcare system?
Yep.
It's the provider's pen. Now it's them on the keyboard, right? But it's the provider's pen because they're ordering these high-cost therapies. The problem is we have asked our providers who are really controlling spend to be good stewards, which brings me to one of my favorite stories. And everybody teases me because I am not a regular watcher of Ellen. I don't know if I've ever watched one.
You can be, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it.
Somebody pointed me to this years ago, and this is Bill Gates. He was on Ellen several years ago. I'd encourage you to watch it because it's pretty entertaining. And they played a Price is Right style game where there was like 10 items, and Bill had to guess what the price of those things were. And guess what? Bill Gates has no clue what things cost. And that's okay, because he's Bill Gates, right? He has no idea what a thing of Tide Pods cost. I would argue that as providers, we have no idea what things cost in the healthcare system. And I'm not talking about charges or copays in this case. I'm talking about costs. So on an inpatient side, where we spend a lot of our resource on the care for our inpatients, if you're paid by DRG, you're clearly incentivized to use lower cost therapies and obviously maintaining quality care. So I've done some work with this great vendor, Illumicare, and they simply illuminate the cost of care, right? So a ribbon that sits on top of the EHR, and now I'm putting information in front of providers. But we had to talk about this recently, Dale, you and I, and this isn't just, hey, this is how much you're spending. You have to give them opportunities to improve when it's clinically appropriate, right? So sometimes 2 antibiotics are equivalent. I have no clue that those might be an order of magnitude in cost difference. And what we found is you put this information in front of clinical users, and guess what? They're smart people that want to do good. That's why they're in medicine, and they make the right choice.
If anybody wants to do a little more research on this, Google Intermountain Healthcare antibiotic assistant, and it was an early version of exposing costs and the balancing cost and outcomes. Right? Here's a predicted outcome. Here's the therapy we suggest, and here's the cost. And let physicians make the choice. Right?
Yep. Yeah, just giving them that power.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can have stewardship without patient engagement, though, too, right? So I am involved in a lot of our patient engagement activities. Why do we care? Well, the literature is very clear. Better patient engagement results in better almost everything you see listed here, okay? And we need patient engagement to help chronic disease, right? I don't need the patient engaged if I need to take out their appendix. That's pretty easy. But that's not the healthcare burden that our country has. Open Notes started this several years ago, and then we kind of got a kick in the behind last year from the 21st Century Cure Act, where now we have to share results and notes immediately with the patient, with rare exceptions. And we'd been debating this for years, and everybody was nervous. And guess what? The sky didn't fall. So what that allows us to do is to move up this pyramid. This is a great patient engagement framework that HIMSS provides. And I think early on, we were focused on those first 2 layers of the pyramid. Now my role, I get to focus on that empower me and partner with me level. And there's an explosion of tools and vendors in this space that are doing some really innovative work that allows us to keep in contact with the patient for their clinical care outside of an encounter, outside of a hospitalization. The caveat to that is, first of all, who knows what digital front door means? There's all kinds of definitions, and class recently did a survey showing that everybody has a different interpretation. I put it into these 4 buckets here. But as we start to incorporate all of this to engage our patients, I'm very insistent that it gets wrapped into our existing patient portal, right? I can't have a patient at my organization have 5 different apps on their phone, one for each specialty that they're seeing. So that integration, interoperability is key. And I told a vendor recently, I said, listen, I want you to be my clinical engagement partner. I love your content. I love your care plans. I don't want any provider or patient to know your name because it just works within the patient portal.
I do hope that sometime there are opportunities for patients to interact with other patients like them in an anonymous way as extended members of the care team, right? The community of similar patients.
Totally agree. That's the top of the pyramid, and I'm clearly not there yet, but I know lots of folks are trying to get there.
Yeah, we need to enable it with technology, right?
Yep. Let's talk about pop health. Almost everything we've talked about relates to pop health. I'll just point out a couple areas where I tend to be involved, and this is some of my favorite work that I do. People throw around the term pop health platform, and one day I sat down and said, okay, what does that actually mean from a health IT standpoint? So I work in all of these areas from data acquisition to risk analysis, taking that data back to the point of care. Can't tell you how many times there's great data that sits outside of a care delivery system that therefore doesn't get acted on. Care management tools, boy, case managers are smart folks, and we've struggled with giving them the tools to do their job best. And then all the reporting and analytics. You and I could talk for hours about data quality. The challenges, my focus has been on the 2 things listed here, which seem incredibly basic, but are so problematic that without this data, it's hard to do more advanced analyses. And there's technology pieces, but most of my role is in the people and process area so that this data quality is appropriate. And I have to give a shout out to your folks there, Dale, at IMO. This is a screenshot of their IMO intelligent problem list tool, which we've been using here for some time. And the problem list is an incredibly powerful tool, often misused, myself included. And right now we've got a disordered, jumbled mess at times. So this has helped us organize it. It's helped us with risk stratification in the HCC world. It's helping us on the right-hand side, you see there, which is a very quick way of cleaning up things that no longer belong on the problem list. And thankfully, your clinical terminologists help us with that. And then finally, the ability to measure the quality of a problem list so that we don't just have these hand-wavy discussions we've had for years. Our problem list sucks. I can tell us how much it sucks and if we're moving in the right direction.
And the problem list could be a super valuable part of secondary use data analysis.
Yep.
Because it's been so problematic for so many years, most of our data analysis in healthcare is using what ends up in the bill, not what you as a clinician entered here, right, Becca? So it's really unfortunate that, well, we just need to be better about leveraging this data in our analysis downstream as opposed to what actually got submitted on the bill.
Totally agree. We're getting there. I'm optimistic. At least today I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
Reporting and analytics. This is one of my favorite diagrams. This is from our mutual colleague and friend, Dirk Stanley. I encourage you guys to check out his website. He is a CMIO and I believe he's a cartoonist. But this is really the 2 branches of my life, the data in, which is largely the clinical informatics work, and data out, working with our analytics teams. And ultimately, as I've shown there with the circles that I added, it should be a virtuous cycle. And it leads me to my insistence that my title is Chief Medical Information Officer, because I live in both of these, not just on that informatics branch on the left-hand side. I'm going to show something very near and dear to your heart because you were the genesis of what we're looking at now, Dale. But this, I can't tell you how grateful I am to you and HIMSS for this analytics adoption model in helping organizations understand that you can't jump to level 6, 7, and 8, which is really the cool stuff that we all want to do. until we have a strong foundation built at the bottom. And the stuff at the bottom is not very sexy, but literally when I show this, this is the roadmap for maturity, growth at our organization. And it's been wonderful.
You've been a role model for using this to progress your organizations as a leader. It works, Beckett. It really does. If people would follow it, there's decades and decades of experience behind this model.
Yeah, I use it probably once a month. I get to work a lot with our analytics producers, probably not on their technical skills because I don't have those skill sets that they have. But I work really with their healthcare domain knowledge, because an analyst that purely has technical skills will be limited to maybe the top 3 images on the left-hand side of the screen. And what we need to do is to get that domain knowledge on top of that so that they become even better producers of analytics that tell a story that then are more meaningful and actionable to our operational colleagues. And just like informatics, I live in both worlds. I live on the producer side, and then I live on the consumer side. And I've used this framework. I probably stole it from some of your colleagues at Health Catalyst. But really, who is the consumer and what do they actually need? Analytics shops tend to want to produce farmer tools because you can produce them fast, but especially in early maturational systems, you have a lot of data tourists, and that's okay. You got to give them something so that they can do their other work, which is making the improvement. All right, 2 more sections here. Let's talk a little about artificial intelligence, prediction, precision. This is the stuff that grabs the headlines. Clearly, our data scientists have done a tremendous amount of work putting out models that predict things or narrow the cone of uncertainty, as I think you like to say. But I'll tell you, just twice in the last week, I've met with operational partners about various models that have been in place for years. And invariably, this is the look that I get. And that's okay, because I think where we're at is we have moved so fast in the data space, and we know the data space isn't perfect. Our clinicians and end users haven't had time to catch up, right? And this was a great article published just in the last month in JAMA, great viewpoint, that basically said what I've been saying for years is clinicians are not trained and have not been trained for this new world of artificial intelligence. And even the concept of risk prediction looking forward is very foreign to us, because my training as a clinician has been on gathering data and making a retrospective diagnosis, let's say. And then to steal your quote, we have to be very careful with putting this information in front of our users, because prediction without actionability just leads to liability. Did I get that right?
Yep, you did, friend. Yeah, we need to back away from trying to, all these predictive models are off base, they're kind of commoditized. What we need to give physicians, in my opinion, is AI that helps them narrow that cone of uncertainty when you're generating situational awareness and hypothesis generation about a patient's situation, right? Just getting them to a better, more precise treatment plan for a patient, or at a population or protocol level. It doesn't have to be at the patient level. It can be protocol or population level, right? Just accelerate accurate hypothesis generation. That's the role that AI provides.
Or risk stratify. You know, in the pop health space, I can't give every one of my covered lives the same resources.
Yeah.
So let's focus those on the population, and it's an odds game, but we're learning.
But a lot of times, you know, those risk stratification algorithms, when you risk stratify a patient group, a lot of what you need to do to reduce their risk is in the social determinants of health space, right? And so what's a physician going to do about that?
Yeah, that's another talk we need to have. All right, one last addition to this slide, and then we'll get to some questions. And that's interoperability and standards. Probably, you know, I tell people I'm probably the most boring CMIO ever, because these things make me excited. But let's walk through that. This was a recent headline from Health IT Analytics. Literally, this comes out probably every month, but I just grabbed one from this month. And this is no shock to you, Dale, given your long history in the data warehousing world, but we have bad data, right? We do not have data readiness. At least from a data sharing standpoint, we are getting a kick in the pants from the government, which unfortunately we needed that government kick in the pants. So hopefully we can help move forward. And the thing is, we have these super complicated, boring, but absolutely necessary ontologies and structures maintained by various groups. And we need those because computers are going to work in those sorts of languages. But I would argue that's not enough because we can't do just everything for the computer. We need folks, and again, I'm going to give a shout out to IMO, folks that can take that terminology, combine it in a way that then is clinically meaningful for clinicians as well. Because remember, it's not an either or, providers or computers, it has to be both. And I see IMO doing some great work on bridging those two. Although this has not moved nearly as fast as we'd like, we're getting closer and closer to standards like Smart on Fire that allow for more interoperability. And although sometimes kicking and screaming, we're now getting our EHR vendors to a place where not only are they providing a software program, but I like to think of them as also software platforms like iOS or Android. And if we have this interoperability, if we have these standards, we can broaden the innovation capability just like there is in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store, and increase the speed at which we're able to move. I know that's kind of dreamy, but and it's not happened as fast as we'd like it to, but we're making some progress. So there you have it. I want to jump to a couple poll questions quickly so that we have some time for questions, but whole lot of things as we've transitioned from CMIO 1.0 to 3.0. So first question, I think is going to, yes, ma'am.
Do you mind launching it on your end?
I don't know where that launch button is.
I think I know where it is. Are we asking, which one are we asking? Right now, that one?
Correct.
Yes. Sorry, my internet is giving me a little trouble today.
Did I launch it? I think I see it. Poll in progress for attendees only. We don't get to vote, Becca.
All right. So if you have a CMIO, where do you think they're spending the most time? 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0? Thanks, Dale, for launching that.
Sure. I'm the Vanna to your Pat Sajak. 3, 2, 1. Shall we? Let's see. The numbers are still coming in here. Yeah, pretty interesting, but they've stabilized. Okay, let's close it. 3, 2, 1. We're closing it. There it goes. All right. So 3% of the attendees believe they're in CMIO 1.0. So that's good.
Good.
3%. Yeah. 80% in CMIO 2.0.
Okay. That's what I would expect, probably.
Yeah, right. Pretty interesting distribution. And 17% in version 3. 17%.
Good. That's even a little higher than I thought. So,
yeah.
And I'll bet you most of my CMIO colleagues thinks that's the coolest stuff out there.
Yeah.
Where we're starting to see some value. Okay, let's see. Can we?
One
more question. Do you want to launch that last question?
Yeah, here we go. Launching. Who should your CMIO report to?
All right, we asked the question earlier, who do they report to, but who going forward, I'm curious if I've changed anybody's minds.
Yeah, numbers are coming in here.
Oh, interesting. Now I can see the numbers as they're coming in.
Yeah. We'll stop it at 30 seconds here.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. Dual is tough in any situation, but
yeah.
Although that seems to be the preference is, and maybe that's the right one. You live in both worlds. I've been fortunate enough to have a CIO as a partner while reporting to the CMO. And I've always said, the CIO and CMIO are kind of the right and left guardrails for the organization. And I fully intend to have disagreements with my CIO partners. And that's totally okay. I think that's the healthy situation that needs to exist.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So you want to see if there's questions there, Dale, or tell me all the things?
There's a couple of questions here, friend. You want me to be Vanna here?
Great.
Kirsten Zeitler asks, and well, she makes a comment. Epic Signal tool does display pajama time, quote unquote, but often it may be the choice of the provider to document it later or earlier times for work-life balance. Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, and
Just yeah,
absolutely. What it adds that I don't see in so much analytics is you get one data point in a lot of analytics. I want to see time course, right? And you're right. I've had providers say that's my preference, and that's okay. But the ability to visualize that over time is really helpful, because we often think, oh my gosh, it's getting so much worse, and at least now we can go look at the data, right?
Yeah, totally. We can be data driven. I have a related question. If anybody would post it maybe in the questions, does Cerner have an equivalent tool to Signal? Do they?
They do. And I don't recall the name off the top of my head, but they do. Nice paper published probably 2 years ago looking at work outside of work, which is pajama time essentially.
Right.
And slight differences between the two, the way they're measured. But using those as tools, they did propose some standards going forward so that we can make apples to apples comparisons.
Right. There's a question here. Curious if anyone has seen the CHIO report to the CEO. I have not seen that yet.
I have seen that in the Gartner CMIO annual survey reports on what the reporting looks like. That's where I stole our questions from today. Yeah. And there are some that report to the CEO. It's probably about 5%.
Oh, 5%. Interesting. Okay.
And there's even a few outliers there where, get ready for this, the CIO reports to the CMIO. What a shock, right?
Well, that's kind of what I maybe think we're ready for it. There's Ray Gensinger, Joe Boyce. Those are physicians who became CMIO and CIO combined. So you had physicians, Ray Gensinger in particular, he fulfills both roles. And I think that's a pretty good model going forward. A couple of folks have said that Cerner's product is called Lights On.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Yeah. What was that screenshot of the Rams rear end there? Was there some kind of symbolism?
I was trying to unshare, and I'm not the best with GoToWebinar. That was actually a Baral, which is a Himalayan ram, when I was trekking in Nepal several years ago. So
wow, looked like a Rocky Mountain. I was going to say, I would have guessed Rocky Mountain sheep, but yeah. One comment here: I've had CIO tactical report to CMIO strategic in that situation. Yeah.
I think, I mean, some of it's artificial, right? If you're in an organization that has the right culture, these reporting structures become less relevant, right? It should be a team-based approach.
Yeah, we always say that, but at the end of the day, org structure matters. I had a boss tell me one time that org structure and titles don't matter if you're effective in your job. And I said, you know what? That's coming from a guy that's already got a title. And actually, org structures and titles do matter in the effectiveness of your job. And clarity of ownership, right?
That's true. That's true. And yeah. I did have a brief experience at a previous organization where I changed from reporting to the CMO to the CIO. Yeah. And we were good friends, but it changed my approach. Yeah. And it changed the dynamic in a strange way.
Yeah. So I don't believe in that soft psychology that, oh no, we cannot, titles and org charts don't matter. We'll all get along. Nah, it's a bunch of crap. Okay.
I'll tell you the area that it's been so helpful in is I remember early in my CMIO career, I flew out to the Big Island where we had a hospital when I was at Queens. And I met with some providers who were wonderful people and perhaps was butting heads on some things. And one of them got in my face and said, "You're just an admin person. You report to the CIO." And I said, "Actually, no, I report to Whitney Lim, who was my old boss, who was the chief medical officer." I said, "I work for you." And it just, you know, it's an important thing that I can put on my white coat and be a clinician. Again, I want to reinforce that I work for all the clinicians, not just
Yeah, totally, friend, totally. Tyson Harness asks, where is a good starting point to begin evaluating whether a decision support tool is providing benefit? I have an answer to that.
You know, the EHR vendors do some of it. I've chosen to not use my EHR vendor because it's very clunky to get that data out. So there's organizations like Phrase, and I think Stanson is another one.
Stanson's a good one. Yeah.
You got to measure not only at the individual alert level. So years ago, my sepsis colleagues in Hawaii, wonderful people, were doing data-driven alterations of their alerts for sepsis. And I mean, really looking at the data and trying to tweak it. And I started to laugh and I said, you know what? I love you guys for the work that you're doing, but 99% of alerts are ignored in this organization. So if you're in this sea of alert stool, doesn't matter how good yours are. So we started to attack that, and we've really made sure, because as you know, Dale, every alert that's ignored reduces the chance that a significant alert is ignored later on.
Absolutely, right. So tracking click past rates, you know, click through, sort of ignores, false positives, that's fundamental. But also, you know, what I learned was governance of these things. If you have a governance body that's constantly watching your clinical decision support and its effectiveness, if you can track the outcomes, that's ideal. If you can track false positives on the alerts, that's ideal. But the other is you just kind of ask clinicians, like, you know, it's like my garage door opener, right? I can't give you data that my garage door opener is valuable to me, but try to take it out of my hands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes it's just a matter of literally asking as part of your governance process, is this clinical decision support tool working for you or not? And if your clinicians don't say yes a majority of the time, then you got to pull it out.
Well, looking at the Epic benchmarks, you know, active alerts, meaning it pops up in your face.
Yeah.
The response rate to those on average is 10%.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
terrible.
ones are 1%. And I bring that to groups when they say, "Oh my gosh, we need to change behavior. Let's put an alert in." And I tell them that best case scenario, you're going to be paid attention to 10% of the time.
Right.
I think I shared my theory with you about, you know, there's a value in an alert. If a patient is penicillin allergic, you need an alert so that patient doesn't get hurt.
Right.
I've tried to use that same tool to change long-term behavior. And often that's not an effective way to change longer-term behavior.
Right. If you think about the decision support we experience as consumers, it's ambient. Right. Like I always, you know me, you've heard me talk about Amazon as an example. Like, you know, maybe 1/8 of the screen space in an Amazon transaction is about the product you're buying. The rest is this ambient analytics and decision support that's, you know, directing you as a consumer quite often to selling more products. But what we got to do eventually with our EHRs, and there's technology that has to evolve to get there, decision support has to be ambient. It has to be just kind of this cozy feeling. You don't even really know that you're getting an alert, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Anu Srivasan asks, would CIO and CMIO reporting together to CMO make a better impact? I've seen that model. I've seen that.
Yeah, it can. I think it depends on the CMO and what their other breadth of responsibilities are. There's a whole lot of my CIO partners' responsibilities that are, it's a commodity, right? I mean, you need to have Wi-Fi, you need to have connectivity and phones that the CMO probably won't care about.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? That's the thing is I sometimes think burdening the CMO with CIO kind of responsibilities.
Right.
I think
Right.
I don't know that it's a good idea. I've seen it work where the CIO is essentially autonomous, right? And it's kind of symbolic reporting, but
it's almost, I mean, they almost belong in the facilities, right? Because it's a facility that we, a service that we conduct.
Yeah.
Not to take anything away from my I mean, it's a complex world of processes and technology, so.
Totally. Okay. Do you see CMIOs as a VP position? Oh yeah. Yeah, I've seen that quite often. Yeah.
CMIOs?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, quite often. In fact, most of the time it's either VP/CMIO or executive VP/CMIO. Yeah.
I think what it is though, it's the pivot as we went across on that diagram from 1 to 3. It's, you know, my role is far less tactical now and it's much more strategic. So I don't think it's a VP role if you're in the 1.0 and early 2.0 phase. But as you start talking about population health and driving quality improvement, then I think that's more appropriate.
Yeah. That's the last of the questions I see there, my friend.
And that was great fun.
That was fun. I sure appreciate you as a person and a friend and a colleague and all the roles you have in life. You're a great human being, Beckett. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with all of us.
Of course, you know that you've got a lot of influence on the things that we showed today. So our friendship, you've helped shape a lot of what we talked about.
Then it's mutual. Thank you.
And thank you, Jordan, for keeping it in line, or trying to at least.
That was a great discussion. Thank you so much. I hope you found everything useful in today's discussion, and take care.
Thank you, everybody.